Hey everyone. Today we're going to be doing something kind of new, which is reading What Is to Be Done by Vladimir Lenin. The plan for today is I'm just going to read this book to you, and whenever we come across an unfamiliar term or a confusing concept, we're going to pause and I'm going to explain it a little bit to you. My goal for today is I hope I reach two different types of people. The first being someone who is kind of interested in socialism or communism, particularly Marxist Leninism, communism, and wants to learn a little bit more about it. This book, What Is to Be Done, is by far the best resource for explaining that particular branch of communism, but it is extremely difficult to get into. It is very user unfriendly. Vladimir Lenin is talking about people and ideas that are unfamiliar to us in the year 2026. So hopefully I can just explain a little bit of that to you so that this book is not so daunting and not so challenging to get through. The second group of people that I hope to address today are people who already sort of consider themselves to be leftists of whatever variety, and you're interested in getting started in organizing. Vladimir Lenin wrote this in 1901, and in under 20 years, he was able to achieve a socialist revolution in Russia, the very first widespread socialist revolution in history. So obviously, he's got a lot of interesting things to say about how to organize and how to bring about meaningful change. And so I think it's very worthwhile to take a look at his ideas and to see what he thought, particularly in terms of like how to organize a party, which I would say is the most important message of this book. I'm going to be doing this all in one take. So a couple caveats here. I am not a YouTuber. I am not super great at filming myself or being on camera. I'm probably going to mess up my words a little bit. I'm definitely going to mispronounce stuff. My dog is probably going to bark in the middle of this one. I'm definitely going to say and quite a bit throughout all of this. So please forgive me of all of this. Most importantly, though, I am not a scholar of Russian history. I am not the smartest communist in the world. I am not an expert on anything in my entire life. So please take whatever I say with a grain of salt. I hope that you consult other people who can teach you about this. I hope you can consult other sources about this one. Most importantly, I hope that you read this yourself. With that said, let's get into it. We're going to start with chapter 1. And immediately, as soon as we start with chapter 1, it starts getting confusing. So hopefully you understand why I decided to make this video where I can hopefully explain this to people. But here we go. Chapter 1, Dogmatism and Freedom of Criticism. A, what is freedom of criticism? Freedom of criticism. This undoubtedly is the most fashionable slogan at the present time, and the one most frequently employed in the controversies between the socialists and Democrats of all countries. At first sight, nothing would appear to be more strange than the solemn appeals by one of the parties to the dispute for freedom of criticism. Can it be that some of the progressive parties have raised their voices against the constitutional law of the majority of European countries, which guarantees freedom to science and scientific investigation? Something must be wrong here. An onlooker who has not yet fully appreciated the nature of the disagreements among the controversialists will say when he hears the fashionable slogans repeated at every crossroad. Evidently, this slogan is one of the conventional phrases which, like a nickname, becomes legitimized by custom, he will conclude. Right off the bat, already kind of confusing, right? He's talking about this expression, freedom of criticism. At the time, there was, he's going to talk about this as well, but I'm going to preview this for you. At the time, there were sort of two strands of socialists that were working in the same realm, right? One of those is sort of the orthodox Marxists. These are the people who are following as strictly as possible what Marx thought and what Marx wrote. The other one is going to be called various terms throughout this entire. They are reformists, they are opportunists, they are economists. These are people who are trying to change what Marx wrote to fit some particular situation. Depending on which group that he's talking about, they're going to be like sort of like using Marx for their own ends. And so when he's talking about freedom from criticism, this is what the Reformist Party orthodox Marxist, is that like we should be allowed to criticize Marx's thoughts and ideas, which surface level sounds great, right? I just recently made a video talking about how great it is to have like leftist infighting and to be able to have discussions and debates with one another, which makes us stronger. But in this particular case, they're using this slogan of like freedom of criticism to sort of like shield themselves from accountability for using Marx for their own ends. We're going to get a little bit more into like what those ends are and how they're sort of manipulating Marx for their own selfish needs later. But let's continue. So to continue, in fact, it is no secret that two separate tendencies have been formed in international social democracy. The fight between these tendencies now flares up in a bright flame and now dies down and smolders under the ashes of imposing resolutions for an armistice. What this new tendency, which adopts critical attitude towards obsolete doctrinaire Marxism represents, has been stated with sufficient precision by Bernstein and demonstrated by Millerand. We're going to keep going. This will make more sense later. Social democracy must change from a party of the social revolution into a democratic party of social reforms. Bernstein has surrounded this political demand by a whole battery of symmetrically arranged new arguments and reasonings. The possibility of putting socialism on a scientific basis and of proving that it is necessary and inevitable from the point of view of the materialist conception of history was denied. The fact of increasing poverty, proletarianization, the growing acuteness of capitalist contradictions were also denied. The very concept of ultimate aim was declared to be unsound, and the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat was absolutely rejected. It was denied that there is any difference in principle between liberalism and socialism. The theory of the class struggle was rejected on the grounds that it could not be applied to strictly democratic society governed according to the will of the majority, etc. A lot of things in these two paragraphs. Number one, if you're looking at this for the first time, if this is your first time reading a book from this era, don't be put off by some of the terms that he's going to use, like liberalism or social democracy. Just remember that these are going to have different connotations to people reading it 100 years ago than it does to us now. So don't worry too much about this. The core belief of Lenin at this time was that the only thing that would possibly fix the world was revolutionary change. It's a bit of a big ask, but the correct thing to strive for. However, at this time, there are a couple of other thinkers, Millerand, Bernstein, Kautsky, these people who say that no, it is not revolutionary change, but it's going to be this and that. So Bernstein in particular was arguing for small incremental changes that would hopefully lead to a more equal society, essentially sort of like collaborating with the bourgeoisie instead of fighting against them. And so that is kind of the core of Lenin's whole ideology, but also the core of this book is that we have these two strands that are fighting against each other. One group is sort of like changing what Marx said to get immediate economic benefits, and another group wants to sort of like maintain this revolutionary cause, right? So let's continue. And sorry, like I said, it's one take. Here we go. Thus, the demand for a decided change from revolutionary social democracy to bourgeois reformism was accompanied by a no less decided turn towards bourgeois criticism of all the fundamental ideas of Marxism, changing from a revolutionary desire into a collaboration with the bourgeoisie, turned the criticism of Marxism into a bourgeois criticism. As this criticism of Marxism has been going on for a long time now, from the political platform, from university chairs, in numerous pamphlets, and in a number of scientific works, as the younger generation of the educational classes have been systematically trained for decades on this criticism, it is not surprising that the new critical tendency in social democracy should spring up all complete, like Minerva from the head of Jupiter. This new tendency did not have to grow and develop, it was transferred bodily from bourgeois literature to socialist literature. So not only is he suggesting that these people are collaborating with the bourgeois to sort of like prevent a revolution from happening, but this criticism is taken wholesale from the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie essentially created this entire idea of liberal reform, masquerading as socialism. Did anyone hear like the DSA won a lot of elections, like I think earlier this week? So good for them. I'm not mentioning that for any particular reason. Here we go. Let's continue. If Bernstein's theoretical criticism and political yearnings are still obscure to anyone, the trouble the French have taken to demonstrate the new method should remove all ambiguities. In this instance, also, France has justified its old reputation as the country in which, more than anywhere else, the historical class struggles were always fought to a finish. The French socialists have commenced not to theorize, but to act. The more developed democratic political conditions in France have permitted them to put Bernsteinism into practice immediately, with its inevitable consequences. Millerand has provided an excellent example of practical Bernsteinism. It is not surprising that he so zealously defends and praises Bernstein and Volmar. Indeed, if social democracy, in essentials, is merely a reformist party and must be bold enough to admit this openly, then not only has a socialist the right to join a bourgeois cabinet, but he ought always to strive to obtain places in it. I'm going to read this again because I think this is extremely relevant to the modern era. Indeed, if social democracy, meaning socialism or communism, in essentials is merely a reformist party, not a revolutionary party, and must be bold enough to admit this openly, then not only has a socialist the right to join a bourgeois cabinet, but he ought always to strive to obtain places in it. If democracy, in essence, means the abolition of class domination, then why should not a socialist minister charm the whole bourgeois world by orations on class cooperation? Why should he not remain in the cabinet even after the shooting down of workers by gendarmes has exposed, for the 100th and 1000th time, the real nature of the democratic cooperation of classes? Why should he not personally take part in welcoming the Tsar, for whom the French socialists now have no other sobriquet than hero of the gallows, cout, and banishment? And the reward for this humiliation and self-degradation of socialism in the face of the whole world, for the corruption of the socialist consciousness of the working class, the only thing that can guarantee victory, the reward for this is imposing plans for niggardly reforms, so niggardly, in fact, that much more has been obtained even from bourgeois governments. This one is suggesting if you think you are a revolutionary socialist and you believe that you should reform socialism so that it fits in with the bourgeois government, why not just join the government? Why not just be a part of the government, even if the government is killing people? He who does not deliberately close his eyes cannot fail to see that the new critical tendency in socialism, that is, criticizing revolutionary socialism, is nothing more nor less than a new species of opportunism. And if we judge people not by the brilliant uniforms they deck themselves in, not by the imposing appellations they give themselves, but by their actions and by what they actually advocate, it will be clear that freedom of criticism means freedom for an opportunistic tendency in social democracy, the freedom to convert social democracy into a democratic reformist party, the freedom to introduce bourgeois ideas and bourgeois elements into socialism. When he's saying opportunism here, this is an important idea throughout Leninism. Opportunism is the idea that you are adopting the slogans and the rhetorics and the iconography of communism, of socialism, to benefit yourself, essentially, right? You use the talking points of socialism, use the talking points of equality to get into office, or you use like the imagery of communism to get followers on Instagram, is to give a modern day example of this.